Well, welcome. I'm impressed with your stamina. In fact, you made it to the very last talk on the last day. That's right, absolutely. If you want, we can all just go over and see Cedric next door if you prefer. You know, I'm okay with that. I have to say I was a little surprised, pleasantly, but surprised by the content I've seen in the Android track at this summit. Because last year in the Android, there wasn't really a track, and the Android content was not really all that advanced. So when I was preparing the talk for this year, I said beyond the basics, but to be honest, it's pretty basic stuff. And what I found out when I was watching the talks this year is that, oh my goodness, people are going way beyond everything I had prepared. So while I was very tempted to, actually I think I've got your slides right here. Where was the, yeah, I think I've got Lukasz's slides from his Gradle Android Recipes Explained. I was just going to use his slides and you know, basically file off the serial numbers and put my own on, but that somehow didn't seem right. I will highly recommend, by the way, that if you get a chance, if you missed Lukasz's talk, Wasilkowski, is that close? Wasilkowski? Close? I don't know. I apologize. At any rate, definitely see the video if you haven't already. And the slides are very, very good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stick with some stuff that is actually fairly basic, especially if you're an experienced Android developer. I hope to throw in a couple things you may not have seen or seen recently. And I do want to effectively live update an app so that you see what happens when you want to switch from the current version of the Android plugin up to the 3.0 version as well. It's not a lot that has to change, but I thought I'd demonstrate it because it's a pretty straightforward process. I'm also going to give, a half a dozen little scripts, not even scripts, just little hand-rolled tasks that you might find marginally useful at some point, or you may or may not find useful overall in your own development. So this is, if you're an experienced Android developer, you may find a lot of this relatively elementary, but then again, it is nearly 5 o'clock on a Friday. You may not want to work that hard anyway, so I'm okay with that. At any rate, my name is Ken Kousen. It's Kousen like the relative, even though it doesn't look like it. We think it's an Ellis Island job or something. My email address, I'm ken.kousen@kousenit.com, although I'm also ken@gradle.com because I've been helping Gradle put together their Getting Started guides as well, one of which is based on Android also. There's a Twitter handle, homepage, blog, and a GitHub repository. Some of the examples I'm going to show you, most of them are in my GitHub account in various repos that I will show you. Now, the biggest thing that's relevant here is about a year ago, I put together a book called Gradle Recipes for Android. This was with the people at Gradle and with a little bit of assistance from the Google people as well. And I'm basically going to pull several apps from that book and demonstrate just features from that have been upgraded, you know, at least, I don't want to say upgraded, but that I have updated to use the current versions of the plugin, the current versions of Android Studio, that sort of stuff. So everything, the vast majority of what I'm going to show you is in that book in one form or another. The book, of course, hasn't changed, but the repo has. And I just keep pushing changes to the repo to make sure it's all up to date with the latest versions of everything. Earlier, I wrote a book a few years ago called Making Java Groovy. It was a Java Groovy integration book. And it does, I should say right up front that I am a fan of Groovy, even though that seems to be getting a lot of abuse at this conference these days in favor of Kotlin. But I hope to show you at least one snippet that I wouldn't have any idea how to do in Kotlin, whereas it's very easy to do in Groovy. I want to demonstrate that. By the way, if you happen to have a Safari account, I have a whole series of videos on Safari at O'Reilly, shop.o'reilly.com, things on Groovy and Android and Spring and Java, etc. Various things there. And I just turned in a full draft of my latest book. It's called Modern Java Recipes. It's all Java 8 and 9 stuff, streams and lambdas and method references and the new date time package and all of that. So I'm somewhat insufferably pleased with myself that that's finally turned in. So moving on to that. No chuckles at all. It really is late in the day. Okay, moving on. Now, of course, the basics are very simple, is that we apply an Android Gradle plugin via a build script notation. Now, I do feel the need to point that out because the trend in Gradle is away from that approach. The trend in Gradle, of course, is to have a plugins block at the top of a script now and add various plugins that way simply by specifying a name and potentially a version number if it's not a built-in plugin that comes with the Gradle distribution. So instead of going plugins block with ID of Java, you'd go ID of, for example, Gradle and version, and you give it a version number. However, that plugins block is assuming that the plugin is available through the Gradle plugin portal, the site at plugins.gradle.com or .org, I have to check it, but whatever it is, it's regular Gradle plugins portal. And conspicuous by its absence is the Android Gradle plugin. That's not there, and that's why we're still using a build script mechanism. So I mention it because we continue to use it, but as you see more and more Gradle build files over time, you'll see the trend is away from that structure, and I imagine sooner or later, possibly due to licensing issues or whatever it may be, eventually the Android plugin will migrate its way there as well also. I meant to ask Zav about that. I asked him last year and it was still far away. There were certain technical, mostly political reasons, licensing issues associated with it, but I'm sure they're working on that eventually, especially as they move to Kotlin, which eventually will be in the plugin portal. So a normal build script would look vaguely like this. I'm going to show examples, and what's different here that I've added is the Google method, and that is very recent. That is part of the new, I suppose the way to say it is Android Gradle plugin, right? I was calling it GAP, Gradle Android plugin, but that's backwards. So it's the Android Gradle plugin or something like that. At any rate, when you do go for the 3.00 version of the new plugin, you have to download it from somewhere, and of course it's not in JCenter or Maven Central or any of those locations. Now there's a Maven URL, and I'm going to show you the upgrade website, and the upgrade website shows you a Maven URL as the location to get it, but now there's a shorthand that Google itself is providing. It's basically just an alias for the same Maven URL, and it's Google with parentheses. It's the method there. So I'm basically showing that that's something that's going to wind up being added to your build script block. And in the examples I've used, I've also needed to add it in the all projects block as well, because many of the latest versions of some of the support libraries are only available in that repo. So it was just easiest to add that Google method inside there, and I just want to show you that. Very easy to do. Now the name of the plugin is still the same. It's still com.android.application. You still apply it. All of that is normal. I've upgraded everything to the latest version, which is Alpha 4, I believe. I talked to Zav, and the best I could get out of him is that they're hoping to have the final version of 3.00 August, September time frame, you know, but these things, you know how they can get delayed occasionally. But they are working on it. He pointed out, look, it's not even in beta yet, and I understand that. So we'll look at that. Now, of course, inside there, I don't even need to mention this, you put in your Android block, you have all your different properties. You can use the Gradle.properties file. And of course, what was surprising to Gradle people who didn't know Android, not really surprising, but one of the things they had to learn is that all Gradle projects are multi-project builds. You have a settings.gradle file and a build.gradle file, and you have a nested folder structure, so that by default that nested folder is called app, but of course if you're adding in your own libraries and things, you could have multiple nested folders, and you just modify your settings.gradle file to accommodate that. But that means we normally have two build.gradle files, one at the top level and one inside our app itself, and possibly ones for libraries. Now, one of the things that's always recommended as a performance improvement is to try to use the latest version of Gradle anytime you can. Now, I'm going to show you that when you open an older app, and older, I mean older than a week ago or a month ago, inside Android Studio, it's going to prompt you to upgrade. And when it prompts you to upgrade, it's going to suggest that you upgrade to the latest Android plugin, which will also update the Gradle build inside it. So when it does that, at the moment, now again, this could change, but at the moment, it's going to choose the version of Gradle that's a 4.0-RC1. You may have seen this. It's a release candidate version. And that works. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but again, it's easy enough to use the current version of Gradle, which is a 4.0 final. It's actually released. And there's multiple ways to do that. One is to run the wrapper task from Gradle. This will work under any version of Gradle. I personally have Gradle 4 on my machine, so I don't need to specify --Gradle version. I can just say Gradle wrapper, and it automatically does it. One of the other things you may notice when you run the wrapper task is that by default, Gradle gives you the binary distribution and not the all distribution, and then your IDE immediately goes, but wait, you want the all distribution? Because that way you get the source code and you can control click on features and stuff like that. And that works. Well, sometimes it's just a little under advertised. If you look at the documentation of the wrapper task, there is a flag called distribution type. And it has values of bin and all, and there may even be another one, but those are the only two I've ever used. So sometimes on the command line, I will put in distribution type all, just so I short circuit the process, just so I don't have to then go click, yes, I'll go ahead and let it download the source code as well. With the all distribution, you get the source code, you get documentation. You used to get samples also. Now I think you get the Gradle samples, but of course the Android samples are all hosted at GitHub. So that's a different situation. Now, alternatively, you can use another approach, is to actually add a wrapper task into your build. The wrapper task is now part of the baseline of Gradle, so you don't have to do that. What this is doing is overriding the default to make sure you get a particular version of the wrapper, but that's up to you. The final thing you can do, these are all alternative mechanisms. This is the command line approach. This is specifying it in your build file, at which point you just run Gradle wrapper and it'll do it. The third option is to go directly into Gradle wrapper.properties and edit the distribution URL string. That'll work also, and then the next time you run Gradle, it will download and install, underneath your home directory .gradle folder, there's a folder, a nested distributions folder in there that'll download that version of Gradle. So at any rate, easy enough to change the latest version, and I have not seen any differences at all between the 4.0 RC1 and the 4.0. But then again, I'm not doing anything unusual in these apps either. These are mostly apps I use for teaching, so I don't have a lot of wild edge cases. But so far, so good. No issues at all. Now, of course, once we get inside a Gradle app, we have our various build types, and then we'll get the flavors as well. And by default, we get a debug build type and a release build type, and you can go ahead and do whatever you like with those. Of course, what people do is they add in an application suffix inside of each so that they can install both APKs on the same device at the same time if they like. One of the demos I want to do for you a little bit later is I want to show you a very simple script that will deploy a debug version of an app on every emulator and connected device essentially simultaneously. One of the problems with working in the IDE is that when you click the run button, you have to pick a variant and you have to pick a device. And there may be ways around that, but it's easy enough to just write a little task that deploys them on all at the same time if you'd like to do that. So, of course, you can add your own custom build types as well, and of course you add your own source distribution files for the different build types should you wish to do so. By default, we can have a main and a debug and release if you want, an Android test, etc. Okay, let me skip some of this because we'll get to that, but I do want to point out one thing, and it's always a bit of a surprise to newcomers. If I look at a basic build, now this is basically a Hello World application in the first chapter of the book, very, very simple. But what I want to show is that if I look at my Gradle window over here on the right, and I look under the tasks section under install, and here's something I bet you wish every presenter had. I have this nice little magnifier. Isn't that nice? That cost me $1. Actually, it was 99 cents plus 1 cent tax in the Apple Store, which doesn't make any sense at all, but it got popular. If you want it, I think it's up to $3 now. But at any rate, what you notice is not there, of course, is install release. We see install debug and uninstall all and uninstall debug and uninstall release, but there's no uninstall or there's no install release. And of course, the reason there's no install release is that there is in this app at the moment, there is no signing configuration. So Gradle won't even give you the option of doing an install release until you have a signing config. And one way to do that is to use Java's key tool that comes with the language. And here was just a sample run where I generated a key and I specified a key store with an alias and an algorithm and the size. And I went through the little interactive prompting and filled in my business information, if you will. And ultimately what it does is it generates the key store file for you, and I put in a password for it. And what happens is then in your Gradle build file, of course, you add the signing configs block with the release block in it, and now I can say, here's where the key store is, and there's my alias. And of course, nobody wants to put a key and a store password hardwired into the build file. But again, if you're experienced Android developers, you know you can put those in the Gradle.properties file. You can specify them on the command line with $P. You know, there's lots of ways to get that out of there. The reason this one happens to be called what it's called is I'm going to show you a little joke server that consumes a RESTful web service known as icndb.com. Have you ever heard of that site? icndb.com. It stands for the Internet Chuck Norris Database. It's a database of Chuck Norris jokes, seriously, and you can just, it's very simple and it's small. And I like that, again, as a demonstration mechanism. I do warn you, be sure to filter on only the nerdy ones. Most of them are not really suitable for public consumption, but the nerdy ones are pretty good. So at any rate, you can generate your key store, you say in the build file where it is, and then once you specify that, then again, you can move the passwords out, you can use system properties or prompt the user or Gradle.properties. Ultimately, in your build type section, in the release section, you can refer to that release element inside the signing configs mechanism, and that way, once you add that in, then you have a potential release build, and you can go ahead and use that. The Gradle task will suddenly have an install release mechanism right in it. So again, this is probably familiar to most people. I'm not going to demonstrate this right now. I just bring it up as something that is interesting from a Gradle point of view that is very useful. Okay, by the way, one of the tasks that comes with the Gradle plugin is a signing report task. I don't know if you've ever gotten around to running that. It turns out, let me just demonstrate this quickly. Now I can do it a couple ways. I can use the Gradle window over here, or what I'm going to primarily do is I'm going to use the terminal and run things in here. And I think I can magnify the terminal font here, the console font. Let's make that also, I think 24 is, how's that for a font size? That look pretty good? In here, yeah. So I'm going to take that as a yes, and I don't know if it did it or not. But at any rate, if I say Gradle W, signing config, and I am using Gradle 4 with the tab completion, so it's able to it's generating the task cache, but then it'll be able to prompt me for all these different things, which is taking longer than I thought it would. But okay, so there's everything that had the word SIG in it. And apparently, dependency insight has the letters SIG. So if I put in sign, that ought to do it. Now our signing report. And when you run that, you could see, for example, that your debug key store hosted under your home directory has the various signing information and everything all built right in there. And if you had a separate signing config, this one is being used for debug, a debug unit test. You can I don't have a release one at the moment, but you could run that task anytime you like to find out the information about your debug key store. By the way, if you ever want to reset your debug key store, you just blow away the file, the .android/debug.keystore. Just blow away the file. The next time you run, it'll regenerate it for you. Okay, so enough of that. Of course, when you invoke assemble release, that's what creates your APK and puts it in the build outputs APK folder. You may have multiple ones there. Of course, this is under the app folder, not under the top level directory. So we can have debug and release. And I want to mention something about flavors now. Again, this is something that's very familiar to the people in this room. So I just want to show that often when I put in flavors of my own, here I'm showing it for build types, you could put in an application ID suffix and a version name suffix, and the benefit to this is it will allow you to install multiple APKs on the same device. If you don't do that, you can only install one at a time, and that can be limiting, although it could be a benefit depending on how you, what your use case is. So each flavor, of course, generates an APK, and I have a Hello World app, and what I'm going to do is use flavors arrogant, friendly, and obsequious. There's a good word, right? Don't get to use it very often. So that it will have an attitude. And this, by the way, is one of the things that has changed in the version 3 of the Android Gradle plugin. It used to be you could just specify a flavor by itself. Now you must declare a flavor dimension even if you only have one dimension. It used to be if you had 2 dimensions or more, you declared flavor dimensions, plural, and you specified what they were, and then each flavor would have to get assigned which dimension it was on. Now, even with a single flavor type, you have to specify a dimension, and I'll show that. So here, for example, is what it looks like now. It used to be that I didn't have to put the flavor dimensions command in there at all, but if you're going to use flavors at all, now you have to pick a name for it, and then inside each of the product flavors elements, you have to specify which dimension that's a part of. So I picked the name attitude, because basically I'm interpreting dimension here, or pardon me, I'm interpreting flavor for mine to represent different clients, if you will. It's a different look and feel. It's the same app, just different icon, different greeting string, that sort of thing. So there's my arrogant, friendly, and obsequious, and they each have different dimensions on them. When you upgrade to Android plugin 3, you'll have to do this on any flavors that you have, but simple enough to do. Now, in this case, I also added a client dimension as well. This is what I had when I had 2 dimensions. So in addition to attitude, I also have one Hello World app that is prepared for Stark Industries and another that is prepared for Wayne Enterprises, if that rings any bells, hopefully. Still, not too many chuckles, but a little bit. And I did modify the app to use the right colors and everything based on the client. But this mechanism was necessary even before Gradle Android 3 plugin. Now you have to do the dimension even if you only have one flavor on that. Okay, now let's get to the stuff that would be more interesting from our point of view, which is how do we do some custom tasks on this? Now, let me make sure I get this right. What time are we going to? 5:25. Okay, good. All right. Now, the thing to keep in mind, and this is something that everybody makes this mistake once and then they learn better, is that whenever you want to work with application variants in Android, you have to make sure to invoke the all method rather than the each method. And it has to do with when these tasks or the variants are assembled. When you do an each, you're doing things too early in the life cycle. The variants may not even exist at that point. When you do all, then it knows what the patterns are and it knows what the variants will be. And therefore, whenever you're going to apply a closure to each variant, you'll make sure to use the all command rather than the each command. Now, this is in the API. It's not real well documented, but it's a part of every variant-based Android script you're ever going to see. So in this case, I put in a do last. I didn't make a custom task out of this. I'm simply going to print all the variant names, android.applicationvariants.all, and I'll simply print the names on that. Now, in this case, let me switch to an Android app where I have some variants here. So in this case, I'm going to go with, I think this one will be fine. I have multiple versions of the same app over and over again because I teach the training classes a lot, and therefore I use the same ones on a regular basis. So let me switch this to a branch. This is in my GitHub repository, as I say. I'll switch to the flavors branch here. And now what you see is I have my single flavor dimension called attitude, and I suppose I do need to sync now. And each of those was given a special application ID just so I could deploy them all individually. Now, I don't have the print task in there. That's easy enough to do. And to save myself a little time, what I did is I prepared all of my scripts ahead of time, because as much as I really enjoy live coding, I didn't want to take your time to do it. So here's the print variant names. Let me copy this. But all of these tasks are right in the book here. So I will add, not in the Android block. Yes, in the end. Actually after it. Let's put it down here. So there is my print names mechanism. And if I simply sync that and then open the terminal again and say Gradle W. Now, by the way, you're no doubt aware, if you use Gradle at all, that you can use the camel case, PVN, print variant names, as a shorthand for running any of these. And you see that it immediately printed all of the names of all the combinations of build type and flavor, which is what variants are. So just as a just as a demonstration of something simple that you can do with your custom tasks, that's one of them. Okay, now the next one I want to show is a task that is based on the Gradle library. See, here's the thing that sometimes doesn't get across with Gradle. Gradle does provide a DSL for your build, absolutely, a Groovy DSL and emerging a Kotlin DSL as well. But Gradle also provides a rather rich library of existing tasks that you can either extend or take advantage of. When you write a custom task with a do last in it, you are extending default task. Here, instead of doing that, I am using a copy task, one of the built-in tasks from Gradle, and I'm simply using its configuration mechanism. And the copy task asks for a from and an into property, and then the task action, of course, is inside the copy task itself. So this doesn't have a do last because I'm configuring the copy task. The actual execution mechanism is inside the copy task itself in the method annotated with that task action. So here I said from, and by the way, builder is a property of project. So by using it with the $sign notation, I'm referencing the builder property of project, which by default resolves to build. But it's always a good idea to use the project properties in case somebody may have changed the actual default name. And I'm making a directory called outputs APK, and I'm saying I want to, from this directory, I don't want the unsigned or unaligned ones. Notice the ** notation, the ant glob syntax, however you want to say it. That's perfectly fine as well. So grab whatever they are other than this, copy it into APKs, which is a directory above where I'm running this, and in order to put this into the graph, the task graph, I'm going to say, of course, there's no point in doing this until the APKs have been generated. So make sure that this task depends on assemble debug, if you will. So again, a very simple mechanism here. If I grab my copy APKs here, and let me stuff that in there as well. And then, as I mentioned, I want to put this as a depends on. Now, you could put it as an argument or not. Depends on, I guess I don't see it. All right, well, this will depend on assemble debug. And I always have to remind myself, is this, actually, let me look at the slides for a moment. Yeah, sometimes it's in quotes and sometimes it isn't, as you're aware, you know. So let me sync that. And again, what I've done is I've used a task that now uses one of the libraries in Gradle. I probably shouldn't bother with a tab completion on that. But at any rate, there it is. Oh, it's under app, copy APKs. So let me execute that. And of course, now it has to build them. Now, by the way, this is one of the things we're also going to take a look at in a moment. When you upgrade to Gradle 3, they don't want you to use compile anymore or test compile. They want you to use implementation and API. Implementation meaning it's an internal implementation detail. API meaning whatever this library is, you also want to expose it to the outside client. And so far, since all I'm doing is building my own apps, I don't have any APIs. They're all implementation. but I'll demonstrate that in a minute. And then same thing with Android test compile. Well, at any rate, if I look in the APK, actually it might be at this level, APKs folder, you'll see that now I have a subfolder for all of the different mechanisms here. Oh, actually that's, yeah, there's all the APKs with all the flavors as well. So that mechanism seemed to be okay. Now, by the way, as an aside, you can also put that task on an existing task by saying that my build depends on that. And what that'll do is that's inserted it into the directed acyclic graph so that every time I run the build task, it will run the copy APKs task, which will wait until the assemble debug task is finished. And then now I don't have to call it explicitly anymore. I've inserted it into the graph myself. Now, of course, if I'm going to do that, it also seems to be a good idea to go back up to the clean task at the top level and add that APKs folder so that when I do a clean, I don't just clean the build directory, I also remove my APKs directory as well. So this isn't even necessarily something you might want to do. I'm just pointing out there is a rich library of built-in Android tasks available for you to use. And it's worthwhile getting somewhat familiar with the available tasks so that you can take advantage of them in your own build. Okay, now one of the annoying things I've always had to run into with Android is lint, because nothing slows down a build like running lint every single time when you're trying to execute something, especially if you're trying to run tests and you're running tests for multiple variants, multiple build types, multiple flavors. Every single task is slowed down by executing lint. Now, I don't want to eliminate lint entirely. I do want to run it when I want to, but it's very frustrating to have it slow down when I'm running 30 or 40 tests. Well, the recommendation, of course, in Gradle is to just use a -x flag on the command line and say, oh, I don't want to run lint. The problem is that doesn't really help. It will stop a lint task, but there is a task with the word lint in it for every possible variant, and they're long, complicated names. So my next question is, how do I make a custom task that allows me to skip the lint tasks whenever I want to? So the first attempt is to do this, and this is an example of modifying the task graph. So the pattern is always to say Gradle, which gives you your hook to the build system, .task graph, so there's your directed acyclic graph, .when ready. So we wait until it has been assembled, and then inside there you can invoke the all tasks method on Gradle. So you get all the tasks, and I'm saying find all the ones where it.name matches lint.star. So it starts with the word lint and has any number of letters after it. Now you can modify this regex however you want, but I like the groovy syntax for this. At any rate, I'm saying find all of those tasks, and then star.enabled equals false means disable them all, because the find all method returns a groovy collection, and then the spread dot operator says invoke is enabled on each element of that collection with an argument of false. So this will disable every single lint task, or every task that has the word lint in it, in the directed acyclic graph. And it's a pretty interesting or simple demonstration of the modification of the task graph whenever you want to. Now the problem with this one, of course, is that as I have it in here, there's no flag to turn that on or off. That's always going to be off. So instead, I want to wrap that in a project.hasProperty or something like that. I think I left out a parentheses here. Actually, you'll never know. Wait a minute. There, never mind. So the idea is that I'm going to look for a project property called something imaginative, like no lint or whatever. And if the property exists at all, then I'll do this, otherwise I won't. And now I could run from the command line, and when I run a build or whatever, I can do this no lint approach however I would like. So again, as a quick demo of this, actually I have to go this way. Okay, so let me grab the entire project property here. Whoop. I'll copy that, and I'll go back here, and I wasn't planning to build it all up in this one, but it doesn't hurt anything. So there's my find all with matches lint star.enabled is false. Let me synchronize on that. And then as I say, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say /Gradle W / I think the example I was doing, here let's do it this way, was to just do a build and just demonstrate that this didn't exist. So if I say build -P, no lint, and then just to keep the output simple, I'm just going to grep the word lint on it. And you'll see that I won't get anything out of it. Otherwise, I would have gotten a whole bunch of these running through. Oh, you see, actually, they are showing up. They're simply marked skipped. So actually, I like that demonstration. And you can see these were all these lint tasks that would have been executed otherwise. Okay? So once again, a relatively simple demonstration of modifying the task graph once it's ready to do something useful. Okay, next. This is one that I mentioned earlier that allows me to install on every connected device at the same time. Now this is going to do something that I honestly don't know how to do in a statically typed language like Kotlin. This really relies on some dynamic Groovy capability. So let me show you the idea here. The idea is to grab all the variants. And if the variant name ends with the word debug, I'm only going to install the debug variants on devices. Then what I want to do is I want to form a task which says install and then the variant name. This is what I want. And in fact, of course, I need to capitalize that so that I get the camel case name for that task. And the idea by saying depends on is I've dynamically created the task for each of these variants and made my task depend on that one. So the idea is when I invoke install debug flavors, it will assemble dynamically all the dynamic flavor tasks, and because this depends on that, it will execute all those tasks, and the result is I will have deployed all my variants all at the same time. Again, that kind of relies on Groovy. On Groovy's dynamic capabilities in order to pull this off. So let me see if I can demonstrate this, and then I'll go on to some other stuff as well. So if I go here and say, all right, let's paste this in. And it's exactly as stated. So what I have at the moment, by the way, are two emulators running. One's running the Pixel API on API version 25, and one's running Pixel on the O preview mechanism. And what I really should do is to go /Gradle W uninstall all to make sure that all of the existing versions of this app have been removed from both devices. You can see it says remove from, but it's a little misleading because they weren't even actually there. But nevertheless, it gives me the message to let me know it tried. So now I can go ahead and say install debug flavors, Gradle W, install debug flavors, like that. And it will go ahead and generate all 6 of my combinations and deploy them all on all of the devices. And by the way, see how much faster Gradle 4 is? Isn't that nice? And that means that if I go over to my emulator and I look in my apps here, so you can actually see these are the 3 apps themselves. If I run it, this is the arrogant one. So if I put in Dolly and say hello, you see there's my arrogant, grumpy cat, and we condescend to acknowledge your presence if just barely, Dolly, And if I go back to the settings again and pick this one, I think this is. Don't have an enter in there. This is my friendly one with the BFFs. And finally, if I execute the third one, this is the obsequious one. And I used Dobby for that. So my editor was not sure whether I should put that in the book or not, But if we're giving the book away and, so far so good, maybe nobody's reading it, I have no idea. But at any rate, that was what I used in there. So the point is by running that command, I was able to install all the debug APKs on both devices. It would actually install on all the connected devices in the same task generate all the names, and by using the depends on, that takes care of it. And that's the sort of thing you could do in Groovy that I don't know how you would do in a language that didn't have some dynamic capabilities to it. But kind of a neat little demo if you like it. Okay, back to here. Now, the Gradle dependencies, of course, are tasks. That's a task that comes with Gradle. Has nothing to do with Android. It just comes with Gradle in general. And you could run this, and you get your nice long list of all the different possible dependencies on there, and the debug compile class. You could filter it to a particular configuration if you like. But instead, I want to show you can use the build scans too, if you would like to try that out. So the idea behind the build scans, and here, let me switch to one that already has that in it, so I can demonstrate that very quickly, is that I think my joke app, I think I added it in here. Not necessarily, but I think I've got a different one. Yeah, because I know I was going to run short on time on this. So let me use this one and switch to a branch, because I was going to demonstrate the mechanism here of how to go ahead and do it yourself, but I think I've run out of my time here, so let me just demonstrate. Switch to a branch where it's all working. Okay, and when I bring up my build, let's switch to the Android view, and here is my build. Yeah, let's let it sync. Oh, I don't have it. Well, easy enough to add. Okay, so I simply want to add, let me copy this from another source where I happen to have it so I don't have to take the time to write it. Oops, that's not the one. Sorry about that. And what I need is I need to add a repo, the standard repo. Let me go back up to the top level build file, and I need to add the repository for, that's again, the Gradle plugin repo itself, the plugins.gradle.org. And then what I need to add in is this dependency on the build scan itself, which I'll put in here. And by the way, that's now up to 1.8. You know, it always shows you when there's a change in the version numbers. And then finally, you have to apply it and then actually sign the license agreement, which I'll do right here. So this applies the build scan plugin, and this refers to the license agreement with the just a moment. Nut bunnies. All right. Well, again, give it. Am I over my time now? Okay, I can go for a few minutes. It looks like I messed up a little bit what it would look like, but I'll just show you the results of this. And if let me go down to the bottom here. This is one of our Gradle guides that we put together, and I want to show you. There's the mechanism, and here's the class path. And then there's the license agreement, and all you do is use the -- scan option on there. Now, when you do that the first time, it's going to forward you to a website where you put in an email address so that you can then get the scan itself. I've done this before, and therefore I can just click on the link and go to it, and you get something that looks like this, and you can dig into, for example, what I was going to show you is you could dig into the individual dependencies and find out what they're based on and run all the tests and everything. So I just wanted, I won't take the time to do it, I just want to show you it's easy enough to run a build scan even on the Android builds, and that is a convenient mechanism. I do want to show you one or two other small things just to let you know. So again, there's the license agreement and everything. We've talked about, or rather, one of the issues that's come up in other talks has been the idea of resolution strategy when you wind up with conflicting values in your dependencies. This happened to me with Espresso for a long time. That seems to have worked itself out to some degree, but you can specify a resolution strategy in all the configurations and pick a particular version if it's not giving you the one you want. Espresso was requiring an older version of support annotations for some reason. So that's one mechanism. And then finally, I'm just going to show you, I built a bunch of tests, but while you may know about the tests and know that Gradle can run tests on all connected devices simultaneously, what you may not have noticed is that there's an Android reporting task. Have you heard of this one? This plugin allows you to run device check with the flag called Merge Android Reports, and this one will let you actually see all the reports for all the variants in one report. See, which is much nicer. And oh, by the way, I like this -- continue flag. If you're not familiar with it, that's a basic Gradle flag that says, look, if you have an error, just keep going. Don't stop on the first one. I was working with a client once that had a bunch of demos to learn their API, and every one of their demos would fail a lint check. You know, something annoying like that, which didn't matter in learning the API. So I just put in the -- continue, and if the lint check failed, it was like, so be it, just keep going. And that by itself saved me a lot of time and effort. And I do think I have this one available. Let me go back to this one here. And I believe the variant here is the tests one. Or it might be the flavors one. Where's my flavors one? Oh, I'm on flavors one. I have to check it's at the top level where you get the, yeah, see there's the Android reporting. That's all you have to do. You put this at the top level here, and now if I was to run that, wrong one. If I was to run that command, /Gradle W, and I want to do device check, and I want to do merge Android reports, Android, and I also want to do, well, I'm just going to go -- continue. And then I can finish up while that's running. And you'll see it should run, oh, and I forgot to update compile and Android test compile to be implementation and Android test implementation. That's only a warning, by the way. Everything still works just fine. But it's running all of my tests on all of the devices, and it will do it for every flavor as well. In fact, if I was watching this, you could see them running by. I might actually... No, it's still running. You'll see them go by one. I don't have a lot of tests in there, just enough to demonstrate that it is successfully running them simultaneously, or rather in separate processes. And when it's finished all of them, which it is now, then I can look inside the build folder under reports, Android tests, index.html, and you can see here, let me make this bigger, there were 36 tests run. And if I pick a particular one, you could see that they have it for the separate APIs, and there's a tab to say, oh, let's sort them by variants as well. And now I can see the variants. This way I could see the devices. And you could do that for all of them. And if you don't do that, you get a separate test report for each variant, which gets kind of annoying, you know, when you want to dig in. But that's a very helpful mechanism. Okay, so let me conclude here. Let's conclude. All right, wait a minute. I lost my slides. Oh, because here. Okay, so let me conclude by saying the business about porting to Android 3 is well documented. There's a link to the mechanism. You add your Google repo. You change the plugin value. The flavors need dimensions. You have to specify an annotation processor, replace compile with implementation API, and you're basically set. There are a couple other things. Again, the details are on that page. Of course, one of the things you may be aware of is sometimes now you may want to generate multiple APKs, and I don't mean a split APK. I mean an APK that only has, for example, densities. Like there's just certain APKs that only contain certain densities rather than all of them, or ABIs. I only want to include certain ABIs, and there's a web page that discusses all of this. And also there's the instant apps mechanism. If you play with that at all, now you're using the feature plugin with a base and features that build on top of that base. And that's everything. So these slides, I'll put them up on the Gradle Summit website. I'll put them up tonight. If you need anything, you can contact me directly. Everything's in my GitHub repository under my last name, so it's, as I mentioned here, github.com/KOUSEN. As you can see, I can never get rid of that picture because I'll never have that much hair again. It's really sad, you know. But at any rate, I have a whole thing for the Gradle recipes for Android and the Hello World and everything. If you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, I'll simply say I really do admire your patience. Thank you very much for coming.